Welcome to Excel Basics number 5. And in this video, we got to talk about one of the more amazing functions in Excel, the if function. And here are the 16 different formulas we're going to study. We're going to do things like see how to use if to track down an error, do debits equal credits in accounting, calculate commissions, create an invoice, use the if and functions together, if and or together, and much more. And don't forget to download the file so you can follow along. Hey, let's go to the topic sheet. Now here are the topics. If functions, logical tests. That's the real driver behind the if function, so we got to understand logical tests. We create logical tests with comparative operators, is functions, and or and not functions. Then we'll see how to use the if function to deliver one of two values, which is the essence of the if function. Then we'll see how to create an invoice, use and or with if, see how to use the ifs with an s function, IFNA and IFERROR. Now I want to jump over to the PDFs. On page 2 in the PDF notes, here's a picture of the if function arguments. Now, the first argument is a logical test. That's a formula element that evaluates to either true or false. And that true or false logical test will be the trigger to deliver either the value in this argument, value if true, or the second value, if the logical test comes out false, value if false will be delivered. So what the if function does is deliver one of two items based on a logical test. Now what this means is that the logical test is the most important part in the if function. Because if we're checking whether you get a bonus or not, putting 500 for value if true you get the bonus and 0 if you don't, that's the easy part. If we're checking whether debits equal credits in accounting, well, the text saying in balance or not in balance, that's the easy part. It's the logical test that is the most important part. When you get that right, everything else is easy. Now let's talk about logical tests. Now a logical test is an expression, a formula element that evaluates to one of only two possible things, true or false. These true or false values are called either logical values or Boolean values after the great mathematician George Boole. Now, when we create a logical test can have one or more requirements called conditions or criteria. For example, if you ask the question, are sales greater than or equal to 50,000? This is the condition. We have the number and the comparative operator. Two characters, greater than or equal to. Now, when we create logical tests, we can definitely use comparative operators, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, and not. Here's an example. Are sales greater than or equal to the bonus hurdle? Well, the logical test is sales greater than or equal to the hurdle. That's the condition. But when we create a logical test, this is different than video 2 in SUMIFS and COUNTIFS. We put the number, that's the hurdle right there, 50,000. And there's the sales we're checking. And then we create a formula in that cell. But we put the comparative operator directly between the two items, either individual items or we can have an array of items. Now that's different than COUNTIFS and SUMIFS. With these functions and the other ifs, we put the comparative operator and the number together. They become a text value, and you use that directly inside of COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, and those type of functions. Now, when you first start creating logical tests in Excel, it's kind of confusing. When do I use text and when do I use the actual numbers? And the comparative operator, just like you would a math operator, plus or times or minus. Well, the rule is the only time we have to use this funny text thing is in COUNTIFS and SUMIFS. Everywhere else, we use the operator just like a math operator. All right, so we can use these to create logical tests. Let's think of a different example. If you ask the question, is the value a number? Well, the condition is the data type a number? For questions like that, we use is functions like ISNUMBER and ISText. And we'll do these examples in just a second. But here we have a column, and we totaled, and we get 350. Well, I can see that's not right. So I use the ISNUMBER function to check each one of the numbers. And sure enough, there's a problem with this number. That's why the sum function is getting the wrong total. Now, a couple other things about logical tests. Now, on page 4 in our PDF notes, we have a list of some of the possible logical tests. Now, a single condition logical test, that's what we just did with our comparative operator and the is function. Just a single thing to check. A not logical test, that checks whether two things are not equal. Also, a not logical test will convert true to false and false to true. We'll see a great example of how to use that a little bit later. And when we have two or more conditions, as we learned all about back in video number 2, we have an or and logical test. Now, an or logical test, when you run all the tests, all you need is one or more tests to come out true, and the or logical test delivers a true. For and, however many tests you run, they all have to come out true for the and logical test to deliver a true. Now, when we run two tests, here are the 4 possibilities for an or logical test. Only false, false delivers a false. The rest are true. For an and logical test, if we run just 2 tests, only true, true delivers true. The rest are false. And when we're using math operators for an or logical test, we use addition. And when we use any math operation on a logical value, the true becomes 1, the false becomes 0. So when we run an or logical test, we can get 2 trues, 1 true, 1 true, and 0 trues. Remember, Excel interprets any non-zero number as true. So the first 3 are true. The last one is false. The math operator for the and logical test, multiplication. That means only when we have true, true, and that math operator converts those Boolean values to 1, 1. 1 times 1 is 1. That's true. The remaining 3 options all equate to 0. So they're all false. Now, let's scroll back up. All right, so for logical tests, we talked about how to use comparative operators and the is functions like ISNUMBER. We also will be able to, in the worksheet, use the and, or, and not functions. We'll see this example in just a moment. Now, another important fact about logical tests, they are not case sensitive. So if we ask the question, capital Q quad, are you equal to lowercase q quad? The answer is true. And we'll see this example in just a moment. Now, the last 2 bullets under logical tests, we already talked about them. But as we know, any non-zero number is interpreted as true. 0 is interpreted as false. Now, in Power Query, it doesn't follow this rule, and it is case sensitive. We'll see that tool later. And then, of course, the last bullet point, any math operation on logical values, true becomes 1, false becomes 0. Now let's jump over to the Excel workbook and try these first 5 logical test examples. Now we're working on the sheet logical test 1 to 5. Here's example 1. Are sales greater than or equal to the bonus hurdle? Well, the logical test is the sales value, which can change. Are you greater than or equal to the hurdle? The condition, greater than or equal to 50K. Here's the sales. Here's the hurdle. Let's build our formula equals, and I'm going to up arrow to point to your sales. And then the operator, greater than or equal to. And notice the greater than sign is pointing towards your sales. So that's the value that has to be bigger or equal to. The value on the other side is less than. So now I'm going to click on the value on the other side. There's our formula. Control-Enter. And sure enough, you get the bonus, true. Now, anytime you create a logical test, you want to test it to make sure it works in all situations. And how many situations do we have? Bigger, less than, and equal. So let's try less than. I'm just going to put 1, Control-Enter. It's working. 50K, Control Enter, it's working. And you're glad that the boss uses greater than or equal to, because when you exactly hit the hurdle, you still get the bonus. Control Z, Z. F2, notice we're using this comparative operator just like a math operator. We put it in between two values. It could be individual values or arrays of values. Over here, that's a text item. F2, COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, MAXIFS, they have no problem with that text logical test. Comparative operator and number together. Escape. All right, example number 2. We see a total here, F2. And what's going on? That's not equal to 350. Why is the total incorrect? Well, the logical test will be, is the sales value a number? The condition is really checking, is the data type a number? So I'm going to use the ISNUMBER function, equals ISNUMBER. I can highlight all the values and spill the result. And now we see the culprit. True, true, but this one is false. Now, of course, we could look through this and eye it, but on a big column, this trick is really important. If I come to this cell in F2, sure enough, the dreaded lead apostrophe. When you put a lead apostrophe in front of a number, it becomes text. And normally people don't type those, but when you import data, that's when you get these lead apostrophes. When I backspace and enter, now we get all trues and the total is correct. All right, so comparative operators is functions. We can also use and, or, and not, and other logical functions also. Now, in this example, we want to see how to use the and function. Here's our logical test. Are sales last year greater than or equal to 1 million? And is the credit rating greater than 4? Now, it's an and logical test, and we have two conditions. Greater than or equal to 1 million, greater than 4. Now, here's two customers, and we need to gauge whether we're going to extend credit. Now, we're going to use the and logical function. Video 2, we did an and logical test, but we used math operators. And the thing about and, or, not, they are aggregate functions. That means they take lots of values and deliver only one answer. That means and, or, and not, they cannot spill. If you need to spill, that's where the math operators come in. Now we have two logical tests. So in logical 1, I'm going to ask the question, are sales last year greater than or equal to the hurdle? Because I have to enter this and copy it, I have to remember to lock it with the F4 key, comma. Is the rating greater than 4? F4 to lock it, close parentheses. Two logical tests. Only when they both come out true, Control Enter, copy it down, will the and function deliver a true. And sure enough, true, true. Now, later in the video, we'll use and or, and remind ourselves how to spill with math operators. Example 4, we just want to do an example to prove to ourselves that Excel in the worksheet is not case sensitive. Here's our condition, and I want to match each one of these items against our condition. Equals, hey, all of you, or any of you equal to quad. Control Enter. And of course, it's not case sensitive, so lowercase quad is exactly equal to uppercase quad. Now, if we scroll down, example 5, we want to remind ourselves of two things. Are both numbers non-zeros? Well, we can use the and function and build a logical test. But as we'll see, it's better if we know the fact that Excel thinks any non-zero number is true and 0 is false. If we build the full logical test, and I need to find out if that's not, and not is less than, greater than, two symbols back to back. Are you not and 0? I'm just going to type it in because it's not going to change, comma. That second value, are you not equal to 0? Close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Sure enough, both of these are not 0. The easier way, because we're smart enough when we know Excel treats all non-zero numbers as true, just highlight both of them. There's two numbers, and we'll interpret them both as logical tests. Control-Enter, and copy it down. And sure enough, that's really true, and that's also true when it comes to logical formulas. Now let's remind ourselves of the second goal here in this example. What happens if we add 0 to the logical values? Well, of course, any math operation converts true to 1 and false to 0. So I'm going to get all three values and simply add 0. It better come out 0, 0, 1. Control-Enter, and sure enough, it does. All right, so we looked at logical tests on this sheet. Now that we have logical tests under our belt, let's go look at a bunch of if function examples. Let's go over to if 6 to 8. Now, the essence of the if function is that it delivers one of two things, true or false. One value is for true, one value is for false. In this example, are your sales greater than or equal to 5,000? If it's true, you get a $500 bonus. If it's false, you get 0. So we're putting one of two numbers into every cell. Now, the logical test, and we just did this one, is are your sales greater than or equal to whatever the hurdle is? Enter. That's just the logical test. We'll put that into the first argument of if. If, and sure enough, there it is, logical test. Hey, your sales, are they greater than or equal to the hurdle? Now we type a comma. The value if true, remember this is the easy part. Hey, that's what I want you to put in the cell, comma, and we'll hard code 0 in. Close parentheses, Control-Enter. And you're happy because you get a $500 bonus. Now, of course, as with logical test, with the if function, you got to test. And we have 1, 2, 3 things to test. Right now, we've tested above the hurdle, and we got a true and 500. Let's test below. 1, that's working. And then exactly the hurdle. You have a nice boss, so when you hit the hurdle, you still get 500 bucks. All right, Control-Z, Z. In this example, we put one of two numbers into a cell. Let's scroll down, and let's see how to put one of two text items into a cell. Now, in accounting, debits have to equal credits. And basically, all accounting spreadsheets that are serious about tracking things have some logical or if function formula off to the side, just in case things don't equate. Now, let's just do the logical test. Hey, debits, are you equal to credits? Control-Enter, false. Well, we know there's a problem. And as we studied earlier in the class, it's often number formatting. So I'm going to highlight all these numbers, go up to Home, Number, drop down, and General, or the keyboard, Control-Shift-tilde, grave accent. And sure enough, there's an extra little bit on the debit side that is making these two numbers not equate. Control-Z. Now let's do the if function to put some messages. If debits equal credits, remember, it doesn't matter which way you equate, comma, and then value of true I want in text, in balance, end double quote. Notice I spelled it wrong. We're going to learn something important about Excel in just a second, comma, the message that we want when it comes out false, not in balance, end double quote, close parentheses, and Control-Enter. Well, not in balance, that's looking good. But what if we fix the problem? I'm going to come up here and type 21, Control-Enter, not in blanks. Well, we might think about using spell check. We would be spell checking everything, but I'm just going to isolate and use the keyboard F7. And it says good to go. And the reason is simple. Text, F2 inside of formulas are not checked when you use spell check, unless you spell check when you're in edit mode. Me being a bad typer, I use spell check all the time when I'm in edit mode. Simply hit F7. And sure enough, it found blanks. So I'm going to say change. Now we're good to go, and I think we are. Control-Enter. If I type 21.001, Control Enter. Number formatting disguises it, but formulas never see number formatting. So we caught the problem. Now let's scroll down and look at our next example, a commission example. We want to put one of two numbers, commission rates, into a formula that actually calculates the amount of commission paid. Now the contract reads, if you have sales of more than 30,000, that means the comparative operator is greater than without the equal sign. If that's true, you get 5% bonus, otherwise 1%. Now we want to create a spilled formula that will actually calculate the paid bonus. All right, so we're going to create the if function, see if we can spill all the correct bonus commission rates, and then we'll do our multiplication to get the final amount. Equals if, and I'm going to spill this just highlighting all the values. Remember, when we have an array like this, we're allowed to ask a logical test of each element. Hey, are any of you greater than the hurdle, comma? If that's the case, the rate we're going to use is 0.05. Otherwise, the value, if false, will be 0.01. Close parentheses, Control Enter, and we have our spilled commission rates. Now notice this is a column of rates. This is a column of sales. The if function is delivering it, F2, but no problem. We can just multiply that column that has the same dimension as the sales. And then for each element, we'll take the sales multiplied by the rate, Control Enter, and there's the commissions paid. All right, so we saw how to use the if function to deliver one of two numbers to a formula, one of two text items to a cell, and one of two numbers to a cell. Now you can mix and match anything you want. If you want to have one item text, the other item a number, no problem. All right, let's go over to our next if example, if 9. All right, on this sheet, we have an invoice. And the task is to create an invoice that can look up the price and calculate sales based on whether data is entered into a cell. So in this cell, we want to look up the price from the lookup table based on product. And in this row, we want to calculate the sales. Because there's data in this row, these formulas should calculate. But down here, when we don't have anything entered, I don't want the formulas to calculate. And the cool thing about this if example, we get to see how to deliver one of two items, either a formula or the formula syntax to show nothing, which is what we want down here, double quote, double quote. All right. Back in video number 1, we learned about the amazing XLOOKUP function. That allows us to match a product in a particular column. Yanaki would be here. Jump over to a second column and retrieve that price and bring it back to the cell. Equals XLOOKUP. The lookup value, I'm giving it all 6 rows, products and empty cells, comma. And then this is the lookup array. That's where we get a match to determine the row, comma. And then return array, these are the items we want to return based on the match in the lookup array column. Now this is exact match, meaning Aspen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters have to match exactly the 5 characters here. That's the default, so we don't have to put match mode in. Close parentheses, Control Enter. NA means not available. When it looked up an empty cell, it couldn't find it here. Now, we could use the if function to build a logical test and turn it off down here. Or we could use if NA. That's an if function that we'll see later that's specifically for NA errors. But the XLOOKUP function has the 4th argument, comma. What do you want me to put in the cell if it's not found? And I want to put the formula syntax for show nothing, double quote, double quote. Now, that is really not nothing. That's why I said it shows nothing. It's actually a 0-length text string. Remember, we put text into formulas with double quotes. But if you use 2 double quotes right next to each other, it's still text. But because nothing's between it, it has 0 length. If we used isText to check a cell that has double quote, it would say true. But when we Control Enter, that's exactly what we want. Now we can calculate sales equals the entire 6 rows times the 6 rows of prices. Control Enter, and we get a different type of error. Value error. It means you've entered an incorrect item into a function argument, or you've given an operator the incorrect item. And what's incorrect is right there is a 0-length text string. And here, when you evaluate an empty cell, it becomes 0. And you can't multiply text times a number. So value tells us there is a problem. F2. Now we have to think of a logical test for the if function. We can type if, and I'll type a comma just so that's sitting over there, logical test. Well, as I'm entering data, as soon as I put a number here, I want the formula to calculate. So this is the perfect situation for ISNUMBER. I'm going to highlight all of them. This would be true, true, true. All of these false. Close parentheses. Now, we have 3 trues and 3 falses. For the trues, the first 3 rows will get this formula. We come to the end, comma, and we want to show nothing, so we put double quote, that 0-length text string, close parentheses, Control Enter, and that is looking good. Now, we're going to use the dropdown. And next video actually is all about XLOOKUP, and I'll show you how to create this dropdown. But if I select Carlota, bam, that's working. If I come over here and accidentally type text, it doesn't give us the formula, which is what we want. 12, enter, and bam, both formulas are working. And we accomplished our goal putting one of 2 things, either a formula or double quote. Over here, the XLOOKUP function was polite and already had a built-in argument. Now, I just hit pause and added some extra stuff here because double quote, 0-length text string to show nothing is so common. I want to take a closer look. This is an empty cell. I put equals double quote, so we have it in the cell and can check it out with logical functions. I have that also in 2 other cells. Let's try equals is blank. Now, is blank only checks for empty cells. And if you look through Microsoft documentation and through the dialog boxes that pop up, Microsoft uses the word blank inconsistently. But here, it's meaning an empty cell. So we better get it true. Control Enter, and sure enough, we do. Now, this is not an empty cell, so let's see what happens with is blank. Sure enough, is blank says, nope, there's something there. Now, let's check if this is text. Is text, double quote, are you text? Sure enough, it is. And finally, let's try the len length. It counts how many characters there are in a cell. If I say, hey, what's the length? 0. And so now we know that double quote does show nothing. But what is it? It's a 0-length text string. All right, let's go over to this sheet, if 10. Now, on this sheet, we have a table of student data. And the task is to find out if students are eligible for a scholarship. And they are if they've completed 45 or more credits and have a GPA more than 2.5. So that would be greater than. This is greater than or equal to. Now, this is an AND logical test. We'll first do it with the AND function. We're checking credits greater than or equal to this hurdle, F4 to lock it, comma, and is the GPA bigger than or greater than 2.5, F4. Notice we had to F4 each time, and remember that, and then Control Enter, and manually copy it down. If I go to the last cell and hit F2, sure enough, that is working. Now, the ultimate goal is to add the word eligible or not eligible. So F2, that AND logical test is just going to deliver a single true or false to logical test. So we come to the end, comma, eligible F4, comma, not eligible F4. close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. And so that is working. And if it looks too busy, which it does to me, I'm just going to change this to a little dash and enter. Not only that, but here's a great trick. Since this is linked to a cell and we can put whatever we want here, if I want to show nothing, I did just what I did on the previous sheet, equals, double quote, and the if function will pick that up in the value if false argument and deliver it. Control Z, I'm going to leave it as a dash. Now if we want to spill this, equals, open parentheses, the whole column. I'm asking the question, how many of you are greater than or equal to 25? Close, and is multiplying, so we multiply the second test. Any of you are greater than 2.5. And remember what happens, a true here and a true in the same position is really 1 times 1, which results in 1. Control Enter, and we get the exact same patterns of 1s instead of trues and falses. F2, we can put this inside of the if. In video 2, we did a formula very similar, but we did an OR logical test. Comma, the value if true, eligible, and I don't have to F4, comma, and there's the no cell, close parentheses, don't have to lock, and I don't have to manually copy. And there you go, the if function with an AND logical test. Now let's go over to sheet 11, or if 11. Now here's the same customer credit table we had back in video 2. In that video, we used an OR logical test across different columns, and we saw how to count and add. Here we just want to add using the if function, credit or show nothing. Now we have to check last year's sales. And for this example, we're going to check last year's sales greater than $1 million. We had an example earlier in this video where we had the equal, but the equal is not here. It's got to be greater than $1 million, and the credit rating is greater than or equal to 4. Now with the OR function, same as the AND, one cell at a time, is last year's sales greater than $1 million, F4, comma, and the credit rating greater than or equal to 4, F4, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I have all of the cells already highlighted. The active cell at the top, I'm going to hit F2. Now if I edit the formula, I can use Control Enter, and it populates all the cells with the new formula. I don't have to manually copy. There it is. Or just delivers true or false to logical test. Comma, and I'm going to type it in, credit, end double quote, comma, and then for value if false, that lovely double quote to show nothing. Now I Control Enter to populate that formula into every cell. If we do math, we want to spill. That means we check out the whole column. Are you greater than $1 million? No locking. And the math operator for OR is plus. That way, when we get true, true, we end up with the math number 2. Open parentheses. Second column, greater than or equal to that condition right there. I'm not going to lock it. Close parentheses, Control Enter. And there are the trues and falses. Yes, indeed. A number of times in this video and video 2, any non-zero number, well, Excel thinks it is true. If, there's the logical test, comma, credit, end double quote, comma, 0 length text string to show nothing, and value if false. And now I don't have to recopy. I just enter, and it spills down. So no problem. We can use the if function with an AND function or an OR function. And we can use plus for OR and multiplying for AND. Now I just hit pause and added some extra stuff off to the side because I've got to show you a great trick with the NOT function. We want to create a formula that shows none in each row if the customer does not pass either rule. because if they don't pass either rule, we're going to consider dropping them as a customer, or at least a credit customer. Now, this is the OR function we just used over here. And notice the pattern, trues and falses. Well, a not logical test checks to see if two things are not equal. But if you use the not function in Excel, it converts false to true and true to false. And guess what? This false for an OR logical test means we got no trues. That means the customer didn't pass any tests. So in the top cell, I'm just going to put not around OR, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. And sure enough, the false from the OR is now true. So if our goal is to put the word none in, if, there's the logical test, comma at the end, value if true, none, comma, double quote, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. And F2, here's the same formula from this column, but I'm going to change credit to none, none, and simply wrap a not around our array spilling logical test. Control Enter, and bam. Now we have an ability in Excel to check when no rules are passed and get a true or put something in the cell. All right, next we want to go over to the worksheet if with an S, number 12. Now, so far we've been using the if function to put one of two things. But what if we want 3 or 4 things? Well, that's where the ifs with an S function comes in. Now, before ifs, we absolutely could do it with the if function. We just had to nest the if, and in the final argument value if false, then we had to run another if. And this way is still fine, and lots of people do it that way. But let's see how to use the ifs. Now, in accounting, when we add expenses, we take revenue minus expenses, and we get either net income, net loss, or break even. Now, in accounting on a financial statement, they always show the value as a positive, and they indicate that it's positive by net income or that it's negative with net loss. Now, oftentimes they don't show break even, but if you want to show break even, then we have 3 things. All right, let's see how to do this. By the way, F2, we show the subtraction, revenue minus expenses, inside absolute value. That way, when we get a net loss, we still see a positive. Absolute value just means the distance from 0. All right, equal if with an S. Well, the first logical test, I want to test, hey, is revenue greater than expenses, comma. The label we use is net income. All right, so there's one test and one value to deliver. Now we type a comma. Now we have a new logical test. And that's going to be for the loss. That's when expenses happen to be bigger than revenue, comma. We're going to put net loss. Now we have a third item, so we could have, comma, a third logical test. But in this case, there's only one other option. So if it gets to this third logical test, we could put these 2 things are equal, but it's easier to just put true, because if it gets here, that is the condition. They're equal. So we put true, comma, and then break even, end double quote, close parentheses, Control Enter, and there's net income. If we have, we're going to test below, $1, sure enough, it's a loss. Equals exactly total expenses, then we get break even. So it's working. Break even, Control Z, net loss, or net income. All right, let's go to the next example, if NA. Now, what I actually want to show you on this sheet is the amazing function formula text. It can look at a particular cell, and if there's a formula there, it displays it as text. Control Enter. That is beautiful. You can see I have the same thing down here that's pointing to that cell. Now, when you use formula text, you oftentimes want to allow for the template to start out empty. And what happens if formula text sees a cell without a formula? It delivers an NA error. Now, F2, this doesn't have a fourth argument like XLOOKUP that allows us to define what to show when it's an NA. So this is the perfect job, not for the if function, but for the IFNA. And all it does is it takes the value that sometimes delivers an NA, comma, and then it says, hey, what do you want me to show if it's an NA? And we want to show the magic double quote, show nothing. Close parentheses, Control Enter, and that is looking good. When I multiply price times units, Control Enter, bam, it's working like a charm. Now let's go look at our last example, if error and number. Now here is a template where we collect scores for the Boomerang event maximum time aloft. And when you calculate the final score, you want your 3 biggest values. Well, we can do that. There's an amazing function called large. If I highlight, these will be relative cell references because we'll copy this down. If I type a comma, K1, that would give me the max. That is the biggest value. F2, back. If I put a 2, well, large gives me the second biggest. F2, backspace. What I really want is 1, 2, and 3 simultaneously so I can put them into the aggregate sum function and get a total. Now, we're totally allowed to enter more than 1K. And when we do that, we use what's called an array constant. We use curly brackets, and then we can put 1, 2, 3, close curly bracket. That allows me to put these 3 numbers into K. That will tell large to deliver first, second, and third value. Now, we used a comma, so these will spill across the columns. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Now, in array syntax, if you wanted them to spill down, comma means column, and I always remember that because column starts with C, and so does comma. Semicolon, that means go down the row. So I always just remember the one that's not column is semicolon. Now for this formula, it doesn't matter which one you use, Control Z. Because F2, we're just going to take whatever large delivers and add. So we put it inside of sum, and sum will do its job. Control Enter. There's the total for Bauer. If I copy it down, the total for Nolene, 275.31. So it looks like Nolene won this event. But we have a num error. And that means it can't find 1, 2, or 3. Well, we could use the IFERROR function. I see it there. It's similar to IFNA. It just has something that throws an error. You come to the end, comma, and then you say what you want to put in the cell if it's an error. For us, it's double quote, close parentheses, Control Enter, and double click and send it down. Now, the problem with a formula like this is down in this cell right here, it actually had to evaluate and run the entire formula to get the error. Now, on a small data set like this, it just doesn't matter at all. But sometimes you have big data sets, and that extra calculation time slows down everything in the spreadsheet. So often, if you can find a logical test to use with the if function, it'll calculate much faster than IFERROR. Now, before we create the formula, I want to steal this. Click on Value and Control-C, Escape. And here we're going to use the logical test. I'm going to start with if. I only want the formula to run when 3 numbers have been entered. So watch this. I'm going to use count, which only counts numbers. Highlight all 5 cells, relative cell references. Here we get a count of 5. Down here we get a count of 0. And I'm going to ask the question, when are you greater than 2? The first value greater than 2 is 3. So when you enter 3, 4, 5, the formula will run. Now I type comma, Control V. That's the value if true, comma, and value if false, double quote, close parentheses. Control Enter, and copy it down. Go to the last cell, F2. Down here, all it has to do is run this logical test. And this logical test will almost certainly run much faster than some large formula like this. So it runs this, and then it doesn't even have to get to this argument because it goes straight to value if false to just dump the double quote. So this construction is almost always faster than a construction like this. All right, in this video, we talked about if error, and probably most of the time you don't want to use it. We saw the amazing formula text, and almost always we want to use IFNA with that. We talked about if with an S. We talked about an OR logical test, either the OR function inside of if or the plus operator. We talked about and. There's and in if, or multiplication inside of if. We built an invoice with XLOOKUP. We also saw how to use if and ISNUMBER to only show the calculation when a number is in this column. We started it off here talking about what does if do? What's the essence of if? Well, it delivers one of two things. And then, of course, we started it all off talking about logical test. And don't forget, at the end of the workbook homework, there's a bunch of amazing homework problems, practice problems with answers, 8 in total. All right, that's Excel Basics number 5. Excel Basics number 6 is next, and that'll be all about XLOOKUP. All right, we'll see you next, Excel Basics.